He left behind a perfectly working SUV, radio still crackling with static, and a trail of footprints that led into the frozen Wyoming wilderness, and then stopped. The only things left behind were a few scattered belongings and questions that would go unanswered for years. And even after his body was found, miles from where he disappeared, the story only deepened, because in those missing years, people reported hearing from him. Not rumors, not sightings, actual phone calls. This is the story of Don Kemp, and no matter which angle you take, it ends in the same place, with a man who disappeared into the cold and whose case still doesn't make sense. Before he became a missing person, Don Kemp was a rising name on Madison Avenue. He was smart, articulate, and well-connected. The kind of person who looked comfortable in a suit and had the credentials to match. By all accounts, Don had what most people would call a successful life. He had a Manhattan apartment, a respected career in advertising, and no known enemies. But the people closest to him noticed a shift after a car accident left him injured in the late 1970s. During his recovery, Don became increasingly interested in spiritual matters. He started pulling away from his career, his social scene, and even his family. He began researching Abraham Lincoln obsessively, not just as a historical figure, but as a symbol of moral and cosmic significance. Don talked about writing a book, one that would tie Lincoln to a greater spiritual awakening. His appearance started to change too. He grew out his beard, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, and eventually left the city altogether. In 1982, he packed up a Chevy Blazer and told his mother he was heading to Wyoming. He said he wanted to simplify his life, write, think, and be alone. And from the outside, it may have seemed like a midlife reinvention. But as with so many stories that start this way, something about it felt like a quiet farewell. In late October 1982, Don Kemp's Chevy Blazer was found abandoned off a dirt road in southern Wyoming, specifically in the South Pass region. South Pass is the kind of place where the landscape hums with silence. It's remote, windy, and largely uninhabited, especially in the colder months. The Blazer had been driven several miles off the highway and parked in a spot with no clear destination. When authorities arrived, the vehicle showed no signs of mechanical failure. The engine had recently been running. The doors were unlocked. Inside were some of Don's personal items: a typewriter, his shaving kit, several pieces of clothing, unopened cans of beers, his suitcase, and radio were still there. Nothing appeared stolen or ransacked. A short distance away, investigators found something more concerning. There was a pile of neatly folded clothes sitting in the snow. Socks, jeans, a shirt. The kind of thing you'd expect to find at a gym, not out in the middle of Wyoming in late October. Nearby were footprints, presumably Don's, leading away from the vehicle toward the clothing. And then nothing. No further tracks, no indication of where he went next. This wasn't just a strange scene, it was the kind of scene that sets off alarms for search and rescue teams because it made no sense. Don hadn't simply wandered off, he had left something behind, neatly, deliberately, like he expected to come back, or didn't think it would matter if he didn't. A full-scale search was launched across the South Pass region. Helicopters were brought in, dogs were deployed, volunteers and professionals worked the area for days, using every method they had to locate Don. But the results were always the same. No trail, no scent, no further footprints. The weather had been clear when the car was discovered, and it hadn't snowed recently. There was no obvious way for Don to have covered so much ground undetected. And yet, he was simply gone. The working theory became that he had experienced a mental health crisis, possibly exacerbated by the isolation or extreme conditions, and wandered into the wilderness. Authorities speculated that he might have died of exposure, succumbing to the elements in a place where no one thought to look. But if that were the case, where was the body? Where were the scattered belongings animals often leave behind? Why hadn't the dogs picked up a stronger trail? His mother, Mary Kemp, immediately flew to Wyoming from New York and stayed for several weeks. She didn't believe Don had suffered a breakdown. She was certain that something or someone had led him away from the car. But without a body, a crime scene, or any leads, the case was eventually downgraded. The official record would suggest accidental death, unfortunate but not criminal, until the phone calls began. Months after Don Kemp disappeared, one of his close friends back in New York, Judy Iao, received a phone call. The voice on the other end said her name and then said, "It's me." Judy was stunned. She believed it was Don, not someone pretending to be him, not someone who sounded like him. Don, his voice, his cadence, his sense of calm. She asked where he was, but the call cut off. Over the following weeks, there were more calls, always brief, sometimes silent, sometimes with the sound of a TV in the background. Each time, the caller either hung up abruptly or said nothing at all. It felt less like a prank and more like someone who was unsure whether they even wanted to be heard. Judy contacted Mary, who believed immediately that her son might still be alive. Mary hired a private investigator. The calls were traced to a trailer in Casper, Wyoming, roughly 200 miles from where Don's Blazer had been found. The man living there was named Mark Dennis. He was known locally as a drifter and part-time laborer, with no fixed employment and no clear history of mental health stability. Mark's behavior during the investigation was erratic from the beginning. At first, he claimed he had met Don shortly after the disappearance and that Don had been alive and well, staying with him for several days. He even described personal details, how Don had spoken about Abraham Lincoln and his plans about starting over. Then Mark changed his story. He said Don had only visited briefly. Later, he reversed course again, this time saying he had never met Don at all and had made everything up for attention. The problem here, the phone records didn't lie. The calls to Judy had come from that trailer, and Mark Dennis eventually admitted to making some of the calls, but not all of them. He offered no explanation for how he knew Don's personal details or how he mimicked his voice so precisely. And despite law enforcement's questioning, he was never charged with anything. But the damage was done. Mary Kemp believed Don had been alive. She believed he had reached out, and she believed Mark knew more than he was letting on. Possibly much, much more. And if it was him making the phone calls and he was mimicking Don's voice, Skinwalker. 100%. 100% Skinwalker. In 1986, 4 years after Don Kemp disappeared, his skeletal remains were discovered by a hunter in the South Pass area, not far from where the Blazer had been found. Scattered around the remains were some of his personal items, a duffel bag, eyeglasses, and scraps of clothing consistent with what he had last been seen wearing. The body was identified through dental records. The coroner ruled it death by exposure, no signs of trauma, no forensic indicators of foul play. Case closed. But Mary never bought that conclusion. And frankly, neither did a number of people involved in the original search. That specific area had been combed thoroughly on foot with dogs and from the air. It wasn't the kind of terrain where a body could easily remain hidden for years, especially not in the shallow open land around South Pass. It wasn't densely forested. There were no crevices or cliffs where a person could easily fall out of view. More troubling was the condition of the remains. Some bones were exposed, while others were buried shallowly in the snow and soil. There were no signs of predation, no evidence of clothing being torn or dragged. It looked, to some, as if the remains had been placed there after decomp had already occurred. Mary believed Don had died elsewhere, possibly in captivity, possibly murdered, and that his remains had been quietly relocated to ensure the case could be wrapped up without further scrutiny. It wasn't just grief talking. Her theory matched the timeline. It explained the absence of a body during the initial search. It explained the phone calls, and it explained why Mark might have known so much. But law enforcement was unmoved. No new evidence had surfaced, no criminal case could be opened, and so the official line remains. Don Kemp died of exposure, alone in the Wyoming wilderness. With the facts so scattered and contradictory, it's no surprise that multiple theories have emerged around the disappearance and death of Don Kemp. Some are grounded in psychology, others in speculation. All have merit, none offer closure. Theory number 1 is the mental breakdown and exposure. This is the official version. Don Kemp suffered a mental health crisis, abandoned his vehicle, wandered into the wilderness, and died of exposure. Paradoxical undressing, where victims of hypothermia remove clothing, could explain the folded garments found in the snow. It's possible the environment was hostile, temperatures dropped well below freezing at night, and Don was, by many accounts, going through a personal transformation. He had left his career, his lifestyle, and seemed increasingly absorbed in spiritual questions and historical obsessions. But there are problems. First, the phone calls. If Don died shortly after disappearing, how did calls traced to a Wyoming trailer reach his friend months later? Second, the search area. His remains were discovered in a place that had already been searched extensively. That includes aerial surveys, dogs, and human searchers on foot. If he had simply wandered off and died nearby, why did no one find him? This theory explains the conditions, but it doesn't explain the timing. And timing is everything in this case. Theory number 2, he went off grid. Another possibility is that Don Kemp didn't die right away, that he successfully left the scene, either by foot or with help, and lived off the radar for a time. Maybe he sought shelter. Maybe he met someone, like Mark, who took him in. Maybe he didn't want to be found. The calls could be genuine. A moment of second thoughts, reaching out to someone he trusted, and then retreating again. But again, why? If he wasn't trying to vanish, why call at all? Why reach out in ways that left breadcrumbs? And if he did live for months or years before dying, what happened to him? Was he truly trying to start over? Or was he trapped in a situation he couldn't escape? Theory number 3 is foul play. And if I'm going to be honest with you, the most obvious. Mary believed her son was murdered. Full stop. She believed someone took advantage of his vulnerability, that he was lured away, possibly by Mark, and killed. Then, when the story faded, his body was planted in a place that had already been searched, ensuring it would look like an accident. Mark's behavior certainly raises suspicion. He changed his story repeatedly. He admitted to making calls but gave no reason why. He had no clear motive, but he also didn't act like someone who had nothing to hide. Still, there was no physical evidence of foul play. No injuries on the body, no forensic trail, just inconsistencies and suspicion. And then theory number 4, something stranger. The ones that don't rely on crime or coincidence, but on the idea that something bigger was in motion. Some claim Don was caught in a spiritual crisis so deep that it bordered on metaphysical, that his research into Lincoln, secret societies, or hidden truths led him down a path he couldn't return from. Others speculate about government surveillance, mind control, or even paranormal interference. It's a stretch, but so is a man disappearing into open space, leaving behind a working vehicle, calling friends from the dead, and reappearing in a place everyone had already looked. Sometimes the facts don't point to a conclusion, they just point to a wall. So what really happened to Don Kemp? Did he die alone in the Wyoming wilderness, chasing something the rest of us can't understand? Or was he taken by someone or by something and returned only when the story had gone cold? Maybe the real story lies somewhere in between. A man who went looking for meaning and found something that wouldn't let him go. If you've got your own theory, let us know in the comments. And if you like stories like this, stories that never quite sit right, subscribe for more. This is Cracked Relic, and this was the vanishing of Don Kemp.